My parents sat me down at the kitchen table one Sunday morning, the kind of morning that should have felt warm and ordinary, with coffee cups still steaming and sunlight creeping through the curtains, but instead, it felt like a courtroom. My mother cleared her throat and looked at me as if she were about to deliver a lecture instead of a request. "Your sister found the perfect house," she said, smiling nervously. "But the down payment is steep. We've decided the best solution is to sell your inherited house and use the money." My chest tightened instantly. My inherited house, the one my grandmother left to me specifically in writing because she wanted me to have something of my own, something no one could take away. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already prepared for my protest. "It's not fair for your sister to struggle when you have an empty house just sitting there," he added. His words hit me like stones, cold and heavy. An empty house? That house wasn't just a structure. It was my grandmother's hands in every corner, her lavender perfume still faintly lingering in the closets, her laughter echoing in the garden where we used to drink tea. They didn't see it that way. To them, it was a pile of bricks that could be converted into cash to keep my sister comfortable. And when I said no, when I reminded them it was mine, my father slammed his palm on the table and muttered through clenched teeth, "Stop being selfish. Families share. Families sacrifice." But in that moment, I realized this wasn't about family. This was about control, about the golden child always getting what she wanted, and me being expected to hand over pieces of my life without question. Little did they know, I had no intention of letting go of the only thing that tied me to the woman who loved me unconditionally. And I was ready to fight them in ways they never imagined. I grew up knowing my sister was the favored one, but that morning it became painfully clear how far they were willing to go to protect her comfort. Emma, the golden child, the one who never heard the word no. If she wanted ballet lessons, my parents signed her up immediately, even if it meant I had to quit my art classes. If she wanted the car for prom, I took the bus. If she wanted money for college, they drained savings I'd helped build with part-time jobs. And now, at 30, she wanted a brand new home. Not just a home, her dream house in the suburbs with gleaming white shutters, a landscaped yard, and a 3-car garage. She and her fiancé couldn't afford it, but instead of scaling back, my parents looked straight at me. It wasn't even a question to them. My mother said it so casually. "It's only fair. You don't live there, it's just sitting empty." That word, empty, burned in my ears. Empty? The house wasn't empty. It was full of everything that mattered to me. My grandmother's kitchen table, where she taught me to knead dough. The smell of roses from her garden drifting through the windows. The echoes of summer nights when she'd tell me stories until I fell asleep in her arms. She had chosen me, specifically me, because she saw how often I was overlooked in my own family. In her will, she'd written, "To Sophia, my beloved granddaughter, I leave my home, so she will always have a place where she belongs." She had anticipated this. She knew the others would try to take from me. And now, sitting there at the kitchen table, I understood why her words mattered so much. My father's voice grew sharp, a command rather than a request. "Sophia, we're not discussing this anymore. You will sign the papers. It's for the family." My sister sat beside him, silent, her engagement ring catching the sunlight, smirking just enough that I noticed. She thought she'd already won. That smug look nearly pushed me over the edge. My hands trembled under the table, but I didn't yell, and I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled faintly, as if I were considering their demand. Inside, though, I made a promise to myself. They would never see a single penny from that house. Not while I was alive. They underestimated me. They thought I was weak, the quiet one, the girl who always gave in. But that house wasn't just a house. It was my line in the sand, and they had just crossed it. I left the table without another word, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Normally, I would have caved, tried to negotiate, maybe even offered some compromise just to keep the peace. But not this time. I went straight to my grandmother's house that afternoon, unlocked the creaky front door, and walked through every room like a soldier surveying her territory. Dust had settled on the shelves, but her presence was everywhere. The floral curtains she sewed herself, the porcelain figurines lined up on the mantel, the handwritten recipes in the kitchen drawer. I sat down at her old desk and pulled out the file she'd given me before she died. "Keep this safe," she had whispered. Inside was her will, notarized, airtight. My name was there in bold print, clear as day, sole beneficiary of the house and everything in it. She had even added a clause that excluded my parents and sister from making claims. I'd forgotten about the exact wording, but now I understood how valuable it was. They thought they could bully me, but legally, they had nothing. I decided then I wouldn't just defend the house. I'd make it impossible for them to ever touch it. Over the next week, I hired an attorney, a sharp woman named Kelly who didn't flinch when I explained the situation. "Families like this don't stop until you put up walls," she said, sliding a stack of forms across her desk. "We filed paperwork to place the house in a trust under my name alone." That meant even if my parents tried to challenge me, they'd hit a wall of legal protections. The trust also ensured that one day, the house would go to someone I chose. Not Emma, not her fiancé, not anyone who had ever tried to strip me of it. I felt lighter walking out of that office, clutching the stamped papers. But I knew my parents wouldn't give up quietly. And sure enough, the storm came quickly. My mother called me the next evening, her voice sharp. "Your father says you're being ridiculous. Do you realize how selfish you sound? Emma and Jacob need this house to start their lives, and you're clinging to it like a child with a toy." I could hear Emma in the background, laughing, whispering something I couldn't make out. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, "The house isn't for sale. It never will be." Then I hung up. Minutes later, I saw Emma post on social media, a smiling selfie of her and Jacob captioned, "Dream home slipping through our fingers because some people don't know the meaning of family." Comments flooded in. Friends and relatives shaming me, calling me greedy, accusing me of tearing the family apart. That was their strategy: public humiliation, pressure, manipulation. But what they didn't realize was that I had already anticipated it. I screenshotted everything, every post, every comment, every text message where they tried to guilt me. Kelly told me to keep records. "Documentation is power," she said, and I believed her. The more they pushed, the more I dug in my heels. They wanted me to feel small, ashamed, but instead they handed me proof of just how far they'd go to strip me of what was mine. And each time I looked at my grandmother's will, each time I walked through those creaky hallways, I remembered why I couldn't give in. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about finally breaking the cycle, refusing to be the scapegoat, refusing to let them feed Emma's entitlement at my expense. And as the battle heated up, I realized something chilling. The harder they fought, the more they revealed about themselves. And I was ready to use every piece of it against them. The real breaking point came when my parents showed up uninvited at the house one Saturday morning. I had been repainting the living room walls, trying to make the space my own again, when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My stomach tightened. I stepped outside with the paint still on my hands and found them standing there like they owned the place. My father with his arms crossed, my mother clutching a folder. Emma wasn't far behind, dressed as if she'd already moved in, her fiancé trailing with a smug grin. "We brought the paperwork," my mother announced, waving the folder like a trophy. "All you need to do is sign. We've already spoken to a realtor." My heart pounded, but I stayed calm. I had expected this. "I told you already," I said slowly. "The house is not for sale." My father's face reddened, and he stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. "Sophia, don't play games. Families don't betray each other like this." Emma chimed in with that sickly sweet tone she used when she thought she had the upper hand. "Come on, Soph, you don't even need this place. You don't have kids. You don't even have a fiancé. We'll actually use it. You're just hoarding it out of spite." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Hoarding? It was my inheritance. Mine. Still, I didn't lash out. Instead, I excused myself, walked back into the house, and came out with a thick envelope I had prepared days earlier. I handed it to my father. Inside were copies of the trust documents, notarized, stamped, binding. "This house," I said clearly, "is legally protected. It cannot be sold, borrowed against, or transferred without my explicit consent. You can call 100 realtors and not one of them will be able to touch it." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. My mother's smile faltered, Emma's jaw clenched, and Jacob muttered a curse under his breath. My father's hands shook as he pulled out the papers, scanning them quickly, his face draining of color. They hadn't expected me to fight back. They had thought I would fold, like always. I felt a strange calmness settle over me as I added, "And if any of you continue to harass me, I will pursue legal action. Every message, every post, every threat, I've saved it all. Do you want me to show a judge what family means to you?" My mother tried to protest, her voice trembling now. "We just wanted to help Emma." But Emma snapped, her mask slipping. No, you wanted to keep control, and she finally beat you to it. That crack in her facade was all I needed. I realized then that even Emma had assumed I would bend, that her entire world depended on me playing my role as the scapegoat. Without me giving in, everything crumbled. My father shoved the envelope back into my hands and stormed toward the car, my mother trailing behind, whispering frantic excuses. Emma stood frozen for a moment, glaring at me with such venom I'll never forget it. Then she spat out, "You'll regret this," before slamming the car door. I stood in the driveway long after the engine noise faded, the papers pressed against my chest, my hands still streaked with paint. For the first time, I wasn't the one left feeling small. They were. And that was the beginning of their unraveling, though none of us realized just how far it would go. A week later, the retaliation began. First, it was subtle. Neighbors stopping me at the mailbox, asking if it was true I'd kicked my family out of their dream home. Emma had clearly been spreading stories, painting me as the villain. Then it escalated. An anonymous letter slipped under my door, calling me heartless. My mother sent me long, guilt-soaked texts about how my grandmother would be disappointed in me, conveniently forgetting that my grandmother had written the will to protect me from this exact manipulation. But the cruelest blow came one morning when I logged into my bank account and saw 3 unauthorized withdrawals, small amounts, but enough to signal someone had gotten hold of my information. I froze, staring at the screen, fury tightening my chest. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted to scare me. I went straight to Kelly, my lawyer, who didn't hesitate. "We're filing a police report. Fraud and harassment. The more they try, the more leverage you have." She was right. We documented everything. Every text, every social media post, even the withdrawals. Within days, the bank launched an investigation. The officer assigned to the case asked for names, and when I mentioned Emma and my parents, he raised an eyebrow. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen family turn on each other over property. Word must have gotten back to them, because suddenly my phone lit up with calls. Dozens in a single night. Emma screaming, my father roaring threats, my mother sobbing about how I was destroying the family's reputation. I didn't answer a single one. Silence was my weapon now. And then the tide shifted. A distant cousin reached out, someone who had seen Emma's posts and wanted the truth. I told her everything. Within days, screenshots of the will and the trust paperwork were quietly circulating through the family grapevine. For the first time in my life, people began questioning Emma instead of me. Relatives called, not to scold me, but to ask, "Did she really try to take your inheritance?" The golden child's shine was fading, and the more she fought, the more desperate she looked. Jacob's family, who had once adored her, grew wary. I heard through the grapevine that his parents were furious about the drama, worried about being tied to a scandal. Emma's perfect engagement started to crack under the weight of her own entitlement. And me? I found a strange peace in the middle of it all. Each time I walked through my grandmother's garden, I felt her presence, steady and proud. She had trusted me to be strong, and for the first time, I finally was. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Emma wasn't done. My parents weren't done. And when they struck again, it would be bigger, messier, and harder to ignore. The only difference now was that I was ready for it. The next strike came in the form of a letter, delivered in a crisp white envelope with an official-looking header. At first glance, it seemed like standard legal mail, but when I opened it, my stomach knotted. It was a demand letter, drafted by some attorney my parents had hired, claiming that the house was family property, and that my refusal to sell it constituted unjust enrichment. The language was aggressive, dripping with accusations meant to intimidate me. They demanded I respond within 10 days or face legal action. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter in my hands, my grandmother's handwriting framed on the wall above me, her old recipe for apple pie. I thought of how she'd always said, "Paper can be used to scare you or to protect you. Know the difference." This letter was meant to scare me. I took it straight to Kelly. She skimmed it once and let out a short laugh. "This won't hold up. They're fishing, Sophia. And the fact that they're willing to escalate like this only makes them look worse in front of a judge." She dictated a firm but professional response, attaching copies of the will and trust documents. Then she added a final line that sent a shiver of satisfaction through me. "Any further attempts to interfere with my client's lawful ownership of the property will be treated as harassment and pursued to the full extent of the law." We sent it off, certified mail. That should have been the end, but Emma wasn't done humiliating herself. Days later, I got a message from a coworker. "Hey, I think your sister's talking about you online." My hands trembled as I clicked the link. There she was, in a public video on social media, tears streaming down her face as she told the world I had stolen her future. She spun a tale of betrayal, painting herself as a victim denied a chance at happiness by her selfish sister. Thousands of people watched, commented, shared. Strangers I'd never met called me heartless. But there was one fatal flaw in Emma's performance. She included screenshots of text between us, trying to prove her point. What she didn't realize was that those very screenshots showed my calm refusals, my repeated explanations that the house was mine by inheritance, and her own manipulative guilt-tripping in black and white. Instead of condemning me, people began asking why she felt so entitled to something that didn't belong to her. Within a week, the tide turned. The comments grew sharper. "This isn't your house, Emma. If your sister inherited it, respect that. Stop acting spoiled." The public humiliation she'd tried to inflict on me came crashing back on her, tenfold. Even Jacob's family couldn't ignore it. I heard through mutual friends that his parents sat him down and told him flatly, "If she's capable of doing this to her own sister, what will she do to you in 10 years? Their engagement photos vanished from social media. The wedding date disappeared from their bios. For the first time in her life, Emma's golden pedestal was crumbling. My parents raged louder, blaming me for ruining her life, but I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Because for once, the truth wasn't just on my side, it was visible for everyone to see. And Emma, who had always thrived in shadows of manipulation, was choking under the spotlight. The unraveling only accelerated after that. Emma stopped posting her dramatic videos, but the damage had already been done. Her engagement to Jacob dissolved quietly, almost overnight. I heard whispers that his parents had pressured him, saying they wouldn't support a marriage built on drama and entitlement. Emma blamed me, of course, leaving a furious voicemail in the middle of the night. "You destroyed my future, Sophia. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Her voice cracked at the end, more desperation than rage, but I didn't respond. I saved the voicemail, filed it away with the rest of my evidence. My parents, though, refused to back down. They started showing up at family gatherings with rehearsed speeches about how family should share, and how I had broken the bond. At one cousin's wedding, my father cornered me near the buffet table, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "This won't end with a piece of paper," he hissed. "You think you've won, but families have long memories." I stared him straight in the eye and said softly, "And courts have longer ones." Then I walked away. It was the first time I saw him falter, his authority slipping. Meanwhile, my attorney filed a harassment complaint with the local police, attaching the letter, the social media posts, the voicemail. When the officer called my parents to discuss the allegations, it was like pouring cold water on their fire. They hadn't expected consequences. They had only ever lived in a world where they could bully me without pushback. Suddenly, their threats had teeth pointed back at them. Emma tried one last stunt. She showed up at the house unannounced, pounding on the door until my knuckles ached from gripping the phone. I didn't open it. I called the police, calmly explaining that a woman was trespassing on private property. By the time officers arrived, Emma was in the yard screaming about what was rightfully hers. They escorted her away, warning her not to return. The sight of her being let off the property she once thought she owned was a moment I'll never forget. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long, shaky breath. My grandmother had known this would happen. She had known they would try to take from me, twist me, crush me under their version of family duty. And she had trusted me to hold firm. For the first time, I felt like I was truly honoring her. But even as I stood there in the silence of that old house, I knew this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about finally rewriting my role in this family. No longer the scapegoat, no longer the quiet one, no longer the girl who handed over her share to keep the peace. This time, the peace would come from boundaries and from the simple, undeniable truth. The house was mine, and so was my life. Months passed, and the silence from my parents and Emma was almost eerie. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands, accusations, or guilt trips. I poured myself into restoring the house, room by room, exactly as my grandmother would have wanted. The living room walls gleamed with fresh paint, the garden bloomed again under my care, and I even hosted small gatherings with friends who admired the home's charm and warmth. But just when I started to believe the storm had finally passed, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. My breath caught as I unfolded it. It was a notice of intent to contest the will. Emma had convinced my parents to file a lawsuit, claiming my grandmother had been mentally unfit when she left me the house. I sat at the kitchen table staring at those words, fury and grief mixing until I could hardly breathe. My grandmother had been sharp until the day she died, never once confused or disoriented, but here they were, dragging her memory through the mud just to strip me of what she left behind. I felt sick. But then the anger turned into clarity. They were overplaying their hand. Kelly agreed. "This is desperation," she said firmly. "They have no evidence, and we have medical records, witnesses, and a notarized will. This won't end the way they think it will." The court date was set, and walking into that courtroom felt surreal. My parents sat stiffly on one side, Emma beside them with dark circles under her eyes, still clinging to the idea that she deserved everything. I sat on the other side, calm, composed, my lawyer at my shoulder. As the hearing began, their lawyer tried to spin a story of a confused old woman manipulated by me, the ungrateful granddaughter. But the moment my grandmother's longtime doctor took the stand and testified that she had been perfectly sound of mind, their case began to crumble. Then came the real blow. My grandmother's close friend, Mrs. Whitaker, brought out letters my grandmother had written in the months before her death, explicitly stating that she wanted me to have the house because she knew my parents and Emma would try to take advantage. Hearing her words read aloud in court made my chest ache, but it also filled me with strength. The judge's face remained impassive, but I could see the weight those letters carried. By the end of the hearing, their lawyers' arguments looked flimsy, almost pitiful. And when the judge finally spoke, his words were clear. The will stands. The property belongs solely to Sophia Carter. The gavel came down, and the sound echoed like thunder in my chest. Emma gasped audibly. My mother covered her face, and my father muttered something under his breath before storming out. I didn't move right away. I sat there, breathing deeply, feeling the years of manipulation, guilt, and fear finally peel away. Outside the courthouse, Emma caught up with me, her eyes wild. "You think you've won? You've ruined this family. You'll die alone in that house, bitter and empty." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see the golden child. I saw a woman broken by her own entitlement, drowning in the consequences of her choices. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "Better alone than chained to people who never loved me for who I was." Then I turned and walked away, the courthouse steps solid beneath my feet. That night, I lit a single candle in my grandmother's kitchen, letting its glow fill the room. I felt her there, proud and steady, as if she were whispering that I had done exactly what she hoped I would. The war was over, not because they gave up, but because I refused to. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. After the court case, the silence that followed was different. Heavier, but not suffocating. My parents and Emma cut off contact completely, and while part of me had once feared that kind of isolation, I found it liberating. No more phone calls dripping with guilt, no more public shaming, no more manipulation disguised as family love. For the first time, I could breathe without waiting for the next attack. The house became my sanctuary. I poured myself into restoring it not just for me, but as a way of honoring my grandmother's trust. I repainted the shutters the pale blue she always loved, refinished the wood floors until they shone, and planted roses in the garden exactly where she had once kept hers. Friends visited and marveled at how alive the place felt, how much warmth radiated from its walls. They didn't know that it wasn't just a house. It was proof that I could stand on my own. Proof that love didn't have to come wrapped in conditions or obligations. Word eventually got around the family. Cousins reached out quietly, some apologizing for believing Emma's stories, others admitting they had always seen the favoritism, but never had the courage to say anything. I accepted their words, but I didn't let them too close. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean reopening the door to people who might wound me again. As for Emma, the last I heard, she had moved into a small apartment alone, her engagement permanently broken. Her social media had gone dark, and the friends who once sang her praises had grown silent. My parents clung to her still, bitter and resentful, blaming me for their fractured image. But I didn't care anymore. Their opinion had lost its power. I realized something profound in those quiet months after the storm. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by love, by respect, by the people who want to see you thrive without taking pieces of you for themselves. My grandmother was my true family, She saw me when no one else did. And through her gift, she gave me not just a house, but the strength to finally break free from a lifetime of being diminished. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the sun setting over the garden, I whispered into the breeze, "I kept it, Grandma. They tried everything, but I kept it." The wind stirred the roses, and for a moment it felt like she was right there with me, smiling. I knew then that my story wasn't one of loss. It was one of survival, of reclaiming myself from people who had never truly valued me. And while I didn't end up with the family I was born into, I found something far better: peace, independence, and the quiet certainty that I would never again let anyone strip me of what was mine. Did I go too far or not far enough? I'll let you decide. But one thing is certain: I will never apologize for protecting the one gift that proved I was worth more than their version of love. And that, in the end, was the truest revenge.